When you hear the phrase Middle Ages, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's this vague idea of the Dark Ages, 1,000 years of mud, superstition, and just nothing much happening. But that popular image, it doesn't just miss the real story, it completely covers it up. So today, we're going to pull back that curtain on this incredible millennium of history and see how our modern world was, in so many ways, forged in the ruins of an ancient one.
Okay, first things first. Let's just appreciate the sheer scale we're talking about here. This isn't just a quick chapter in a history book. This is a massive, sprawling era. It kicks off with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire around 476 and stretches all the way to the brink of the modern world. Some historians mark the end with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, others with Columbus's voyage in 1492. Either way, that is a full 1,000 years of change we're about to unpack.
And this right here, this captures the absolute core of the transformation. The old Roman world, with its single emperor and slave-based economy, didn't just vanish overnight, it completely morphed into something new. Power wasn't in one central place anymore. It shattered and spread out locally. The economic engine switched from slavery to a new system called feudal serfdom. And that one unified Roman culture? It was replaced by this incredible, complex mix of classical ideas, a powerful new Christian faith, and huge influences from the fast-rising Islamic world.
So how in the world are we going to tackle 1,000 years of history? Well, we've got a roadmap. We've broken it down into 5 parts. We'll start with the end of Rome, check out the new empires that took its place, then we'll really define what feudalism was. After that, we'll bust that Dark Ages myth wide open, and finally, we'll look at the social pyramid that decided everyone's place in the world. All right, let's dive right in with the collapse. When the Roman Empire in the West finally crumbled, you might imagine it just left a big, empty hole. But that's not what happened. It wasn't a vacuum. Instead, it was more like a garden where, in the place of one giant old tree, 100 new, different things started to grow.
So, the Germanic peoples, the ones the Romans had often called barbarians, they were the new bosses in Western Europe. But here's the fascinating part. They weren't just destroyers. As they settled down, this amazing fusion started to happen. They began to pick and choose from the civilization they had just conquered, adopting things like Roman legal structures. And most important of all, they adopted Christianity, which would become the single great unifying force holding this new, fragmented continent together. Now, all this change wasn't happening in isolation. With Rome no longer the center of the universe, a huge power vacuum opened up. And you know what they say about nature and vacuums? New players immediately jumped onto the world stage, all competing for influence and completely redrawing the map.
You can basically think of it like this. 3 major heirs to Rome's legacy emerged. Over in the east, the Roman Empire actually kept on going. We just call it the Byzantine Empire now. To the south, a brand new and incredibly powerful force, the Islamic Caliphates, exploded onto the scene, expanding with unbelievable speed. And then in the west, you had that patchwork of new Germanic kingdoms we were just talking about.
And man, this was an age of constant motion. After the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632, Islamic armies built a massive empire that stretched all the way from India to Spain. Their push into Europe was famously stopped in 732 by a Frankish leader named Charles Martel, and his grandson, the famous Charlemagne, would build on that victory, getting himself crowned emperor in 800. Later in 962, Otto the Great founded the Holy Roman Empire. Both were basically attempts to put the band back together, to recreate the glory of Rome, but this time in a new Christian form.
But here's the thing. These new empires were pretty fragile. Charlemagne's, for example, fell apart not long after he died. Then a whole new wave of invasions from Vikings, Magyars, and others made everyone feel incredibly insecure. The kings were often too weak or too far away to protect people. So a new system had to be created, one that wasn't based on a strong central government, but on personal promises and loyalty. This was the age of feudalism.
So, feudalism. We hear that word all the time, but what does it actually mean? At its absolute core, it's a deal. It's a deeply personal contract between two men, a lord, who's in charge, and his vassal, who serves him. The lord gives the vassal protection and, most importantly, a piece of land to control. That's called a fief. In return, the vassal promises loyalty and, when the time comes, his sword.
And this bond, this deal, wasn't just a casual handshake. It was sealed with a very serious and very public ceremony. First was homage, where the vassal would literally kneel before his lord and swear his loyalty for everyone to see. Then came investiture, where the lord would hand over something symbolic, like a clump of dirt or a flag, to represent the fief he was granting. In a world without strong governments, your personal oath was everything.
So what did that promise of loyalty actually look like in practice? Well, it boiled down to two specific duties, which this Latin phrase sums up perfectly: auxilium et concilium. Auxilium means aid, which really meant military service. When your lord called, you had to show up ready to fight. And concilium means counsel. You had to go to your lord's court, give him advice, and help him make decisions.
Now, this political system totally reshaped the economy. Big trade networks dried up, and coins became rare. Suddenly, wealth wasn't about money anymore. It was about land. Land was everything. The economy became super local, centered on farming. Each fief was like its own little self-sufficient bubble, with a village and fields all clustered around the lord's castle, making just about everything it needed to get by.
So when you hear all that, a decentralized, rural, often violent world, it's easy to see where that Dark Ages myth comes from. But that is only one slice of the pie, because inside that same society, there were these incredible, vibrant centers of learning, art, and innovation that are still breathtaking today.
So let's just tackle that question head on. Was this really a time of total ignorance where everyone just forgot how to read and build things? Well, the stuff they left behind tells a much more interesting story. I mean, the evidence against the Dark Ages idea is overwhelming. Think about it. Monasteries acted like safe houses for knowledge, where monks spent their entire lives painstakingly copying ancient Greek and Roman books that would have been lost forever otherwise. The whole idea of a university? That was invented in the Middle Ages. Master builders figured out how to build the soaring Gothic cathedrals, these absolute marvels of engineering and light. And you had troubadours composing and spreading epic poems and new ideas about love. This was not a dark time. And it wasn't just art, it was an age of intense intellectual debate. The main philosophy of the time, called scholasticism, was all about tackling the biggest questions. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas were trying to square their Christian faith with the hardcore logic of ancient philosophers like Aristotle, whose books, by the way, had been preserved and studied in the great learning centers of the Islamic world and were now making their way back into Europe.
Okay, for our last section, let's look at how all these people fit together. Medieval society was built on a very clear, very rigid social pyramid. Everybody knew their place, and that place wasn't something you chose, it was something you were born into.
Right at the tippy top, you had the king, but below him, everyone was seen as belonging to one of three groups, or orders. You had those who fight. That's all your nobles, from the big-shot dukes down to the local knights. Then you had those who pray. That's the clergy, from powerful bishops to the humble village priest. And then, making up the massive foundation for the whole thing, you had those who work.
And when I say massive foundation, I am not kidding. Just look at this number. Roughly 90% of the entire population. Let that sink in for a second. 9 out of every 10 people in medieval Europe belonged to the peasantry. They were the ones whose labor on the land made everything else possible.
Now, most of these peasants were called serfs, and this is a really important distinction. A serf was not a slave. It's easy to confuse them, but legally it's a huge difference. A slave was property that could be bought and sold like an animal. A serf, however, was legally a person. The catch? They were bound to the land. They couldn't just pack up and leave, but they also couldn't be sold away from their home and family. They came with the territory.
And maybe the most defining feature of this world was that there was almost zero social mobility. It was a static society. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. If you were born a noble, you died a noble. End of story. And this entire rigid system, with all its unfairness, was explained and justified by religion. The promise was that if you accepted your lot in this life, no matter how hard it was, your real reward would come in the next one.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? First and foremost, the Middle Ages was not some boring 1,000-year-long night. It was an incredibly dynamic era of huge transformation. An old world was shattered and a new one was built on a foundation of personal loyalty we call feudalism. It was an age of incredible faith that gave us not just awe-inspiring cathedrals, but also the university. And it was all held together by a rigid social pyramid that gave every single person their place. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Their world was held together by a clear framework of land, sworn personal loyalty, and a shared unifying faith. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? When we look at our own complex global world today, what are the fundamental bonds that hold us all together?